A prison officer from Birmingham has been sent to prison herself for having an intimate relationship with a prisoner. Shania Begum is 25 years old. She'd been working in HMP Birmingham since 2018. Now, the prison is Category B, which means that the prisoners aren't considered as dangerous as in a Category A prison, but they are still held to quite high security standards. At first, she was a respectable member of staff until she began having an S relationship with an inmate in 2022. This was Joshua Mullings. Now, fellow prison officers had actually heard rumours and started to get suspicious about the pair's relationship. They knew that they needed hard evidence in order to do something about this. They therefore installed small security cameras into cupboards. Now, this actually did enable them to catch the pair engaging in S activity. On the 3rd of October 2022, she was arrested. Although she did express remorse for her actions, she was given a 16-month prison sentence herself.
This is by far one of the most unlucky deaths caught on camera explained. The man that you see sitting down right here naked was 26-year-old Nathaniel Christian. And he was doing his normal stuff at night, but was doing it naked for some reason. Nothing happens in the video at first, but at one point, Nathaniel gets up to smoke his cigarette by the window. Most likely so it doesn't make his room smell like cigarette smoke. But suddenly, the dog that you see sitting down right here walks right up behind Nathaniel as he's leaning out the window smoking and shoves his nose into his gooch/butthole area. This obviously makes Nathaniel freak out, and he suddenly then falls out the window to his death. There's really no information at all surrounding this tragic accident besides the man's name and the video of the accident happening. And since there's little to no information, people speculate that this video is fake, but I have no idea. Some people say he died from the fall, and others say his room wasn't that high up and you could hear him hit the bushes after a couple seconds. All in all, this is a very unfortunate accident, and if it's indeed real, this is definitely one of the most unlucky deaths ever. His dog just literally sniffed his butt and caused him to completely freak out. If you ever look up the video, you can tell just how unlucky it really is. If this is real, rest in peace to Nathaniel, and what are the odds of this happening?
This specific creepypasta led to an actual case called the Slender Man stabbing. So it started off with this girl, her name is Peyton, and her best friend Morgan at the time, right? They ended up meeting this girl, Anissa. And a lot of people do say that whenever it goes from a duo to a trio,
someone always feels left out.
Exactly. And Morgan shared the fact that she was into this creepy, disturbing thing, and Anissa was also into it. So they just became even more closer. They obviously eventually discovered on the internet
Slender Man.
They got so deep into it, they started researching the lore, who is Slender Man, what exactly happens when you see him, to the point where they started believing that this shit was real. Fast forward to May 30th, 2014, which is Morgan's birthday. They were going to celebrate it with hanging out, afterwards a sleepover. But this time it was weird.
Why? Well,
instead of like staying up all night and watching movies and shit, Morgan was like, yeah, let's just go to sleep. And Peyton was kind of like, what the
we never do this. We always stay up late.
The next morning, May 31st, they go for a walk in the park. Morgan and Anissa say, we have an idea. We should play hide and seek. Morgan is the one that's counting. Anissa and Payne run into the woods, and Anissa tells Payne, if you hide under these leaves, she probably won't see you and you'll probably win and stuff. And at this point, she hears Morgan stop counting, and then she hears footsteps slowly coming towards her. Out of nowhere, she feels somebody jump on top of her, basically trying to pin her down. She could see Anissa's on top of her, and Morgan whispered in her ear, she's like, I'm sorry. And then she proceeds to stab her 19 times. The reason why was because Slender Man told him to do it. She realizes, like,
everyone needs to take a good look at this baby because she's been missing since at least late April, and now 5 people have been arrested in connection to her disappearance. This is 8-month-old Maya Tucker Rudd. She was last known to be with her parents, Cage and Tesla, at their home in Reynolds Station, Kentucky. Both Cage and Tesla have a history of drug offenses, and on May 30th, some of their family notified CPS that they hadn't seen baby Maya in weeks. This obviously sparked an investigation, and when CPS couldn't locate her, they called Kentucky State Police to conduct a welfare check at their home on Deanfield Church Road. Baby Maya was nowhere to be found, but a large amount of drugs was found inside the home. Not long after, both Cage and Tesla were arrested at a motel about 30 minutes away and were in possession of a large amount of drugs as well, including fentanyl. They lied to police and said that family services had taken Maya. CPS had previously taken 3 older children from the home and had plans to take Maya as well to be with her siblings, but before that could happen, Maya vanished. And it's now been months since she was last seen by anybody. Cage and Tesla have not been cooperative in the search for baby Maya either. They have both been arrested on multiple multiple drug charges, trafficking, abandonment of a minor, and are facing child abuse. Maya's grandparents, Ricky Smith and Billy Rudd, have also been arrested in connection to her disappearance. At the time of her disappearance, Maya's grandpa Ricky was living with them at their home, and police say that he was using the home as a trafficking base. At the time of his arrest, he had a ton of drugs on him. He's facing drug trafficking and child abuse charges, as well as having weapons as a convicted felon. Maya's grandma Billy was arrested on a domestic violence warrant from late last year. A fifth person was arrested in relation to Maya's disappearance as well. His name is Timothy Roach, and as of right now, it's not clear how he's tied into everything. Although when police pulled up to search their house, Timothy was in their driveway and had thrown drugs underneath his car. They are all being held in the Ohio County Detention Center. Authorities have brought in cadaver dogs to search for Maya near a wooded area and a church on Hardin Road, which is not even a mile from the family's home. But so far, they haven't found anything. The fact that an 8-month-old hasn't been seen for months is horrifying, yet police say that this does not meet the requirements for an Amber Alert. She was born in October and sadly tested positive for meth, so police are wondering if she could have possibly been sold for drugs. Where is baby Maya? If you have any information about this case, please call 270-826-3312.
There's an active serial killer in Austin, Texas. I have spent the last few weeks researching all of this. I've spoken with the families of victims, and the conclusions that we've drawn here are absolutely disturbing. But let's take a look. So in the last decade or so, there have been over 20 men's bodies that were found in Lady Bird Lake in Austin, Texas. Here's a map of just the bodies that were found in 2022 to 2023. So if you've never been to Austin and you don't know what Lady Bird Lake is, it's not really a lake, it's more like a river. It flows right through the center of the city. And when people come to Austin, they paddleboard on Lady Bird Lake. I actually used to live in these apartments right here, so my wife and I walked there all the time. But in the last couple of years, so many men's bodies have been found in that body of water that people are saying there's a serial killer. I've got documents, autopsy reports. We're gonna back all this stuff up with evidence. So swimming has actually been banned in Lady Bird Lake since the 1960s. And that swimming ban came after tragically 2 sisters drowned in the lake along with a couple of other people that same year. And so the Austin City Council unanimously voted to stop people from swimming there. Now, I know that people drown and accidentally die all the time, but it's the very suspicious circumstances surrounding these men's deaths that has led me to draw a different conclusion. If you want me to go line item through every person that's died there, let me know and I'll make this a series. I have done a lot of research on this subject. So the first death that was really suspicious in Lady Bird Lake was in 2008, and it was this man who died, Riyad Hammad. Now, Riyad was a very well-educated man. He was a teacher in the Austin area. He had loads of friends and family, and he frequently gave money to and volunteered with Palestinian relief charities. But a few months before his death, the FBI raided Riyad's home. It was reported that they took out 40 boxes of materials from his house, and it's never been revealed exactly what they removed from his home or exactly why they were looking there in the first place. Because only a few months later, Riyad's body was found in Lady Bird Lake. Now this is really bizarre stuff. So the authorities said that Riyad had taken his own life. But when they pulled Riyad's body out of Lady Bird Lake, there were some bizarre things on it. His hands and feet were duct taped together. There was duct tape covering his mouth, duct tape really all over his face. And immediately people thought there is no way that he could have done this to himself. But before any sort of real investigation was done into this is a real APD news bulletin from April 16th, 2008. The Austin Police Department and authorities in the city declared that this was a case of somebody taking their own life. That's all that it was, according to Austin police. But as you can see from local newspaper reports at the time, people were immediately questioning exactly what happened to Riyad. But there would never be any real answers in this case. But this was only the start. Like I said, there have been over 20 men's bodies found here, and some of the circumstances are even more bizarre than what we just talked about. And I'm going to make some more videos exposing this stuff so people can be aware of what's happening in Austin. But if you want right now, you can head to my YouTube channel, The Paranormal Files Official Channel. And I just released a 3-hour-long documentary going over every single fact in this case. Like I said, I talked to family members of victims who believe that their loved ones were killed. And this is some really eye-opening stuff. So the link is going to be in my bio. And I'm going to continue this series over the next couple of days to hopefully raise some awareness of what's happening in a city that I have so much love for.
47-year-old teacher has been arrested for giving lap dances to children. Louisa Melchoin is a school guidance counselor from Connecticut. She was working at Nathan Hale Middle School and was teaching children as young as 7th grade. Now, the teacher is actually married with children of her own. She had been working as a teacher for over 20 years. An anonymous tip came into the police in April, stating that somebody had found inappropriate messages on Louisa's phone to one of the students. Screenshots were provided to police and they began investigating this. Explicit photos had been sent and money had been exchanged between the pair. She is currently accused of giving a lap dance to a child and other S activities. The child has been interviewed by police and stated that the teacher would invite him into her office and she would undertake the dances and other illegal acts. She would apparently groom him by sending him money for taxis and food. She has resigned from her job and is charged with SA and risk of injury to a child.
This man died after being stung by 1,000 bees, and this is definitely one of the worst ways to die. This is Alex Bessler, and he and one of his friends were on a morning hike in the mountains of Arizona when out of nowhere a large swarm of hostile bees attacked. Alex, who was 23, was overtaken by the aggressive bees and stung more than 1,000 times, authorities said. Several people attempted to help Alex as he laid on the ground covered in bees, withering in pain and screaming. But every rescuer's attempt was driven back by the angry swarm. The county sheriff sergeant Alan Romer finally used a utility vehicle to get close, and he was able to load Alex onto the UTV and remove him from the scene, still completely covered with bees and the swarm pursuing. This isn't a picture of Alex when he was getting swarmed, but I would imagine this is what he kind of looked like. Alex was then taken to a local hospital where he was sadly pronounced dead. His friend was able to escape the bees and take shelter in a nearby restroom. Sergeant Romer, who was stationed in the area for 16 years, also said, "It was by far the worst bee attack he's ever seen." He was also stung a bunch, but not nearly as much as Alex. I am completely terrified of bees, so this story really freaks me out, and I cannot imagine getting swarmed by more than 1,000 bees and getting stung. This is absolutely awful, and may Alex Bessler rest in peace.
This Christian school teacher turned out to be one of the most hardcore pedophiles in the state of Florida, and his fall from grace really needs to be studied. This is 69-year-old Stephen Robb, and in 2022, Stephen decided to upload CP or CSAM to one of his email addresses. Stephen had been a longtime teacher at the Grace Community Church in Florida, and something I should add in here is that this church is openly outspoken against gay and LGBTQ+ students. In the same year that Stephen was arrested, the school said that gay and transgender students will be asked to leave. I find it a bit hypocritical then that one of their head teachers was arrested for being a pedophile. So after this anonymous tip came through, investigators got warrants and searched Stephen's devices. That's when they found all the CP images and videos that he had uploaded and collected. And eerily, he even had photos of a student that was fully clothed from his school. I mean, this is truly some disgusting stuff. This guy has been entrusted by his community to care for children almost every day of the week, and he puts on a mask at work. He masquerades as a Christian man with good values, who cares for families, loves God, but when he goes home at night, that's when he turns into the demonic pedophile. I don't know, it's just really disturbing how many teachers have been arrested for crimes like this recently, and I don't even know how to begin to combat this, but the best that I can do here is try to raise some awareness. If you want to listen to more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
Sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminating in acts of cannibalism.
This is the last known footage of 4-year-old Cash Gernon, who was kidnapped out of a bed that he shared with his twin brother. He would later be found stabbed to death just 8 blocks away. In the early morning hours of May 15th, 2021, footage from a baby monitor monitor shows 18-year-old Darren Brown enter a bedroom shared by 4-year-old twins Cash and Carter. The twins had been staying with a woman named Monica in Dallas, Texas for several months after their dad Trevor reportedly left them there to look for work out of town. Trevor said that he didn't want to disturb their schedule, so he left them with Monica, but after he left, he never contacted Monica again. And to make matters worse, the twins' mom had no idea where they were. The baby monitor showed Darren kidnap Cash from his bed, and the moments that follow are horrific. Darren carried Cash, still sleeping, 8 blocks away to a walking trail and proceeded to stab him several times in the chest, killing him. He then brought Cash's body back out to a public street and left him there. His body would be found a few hours later by a woman out on a morning walk, and she said she's never seen anything more horrifying. Cash was just laying there in a pool of blood, and ants were covering the bottoms of his feet. She called 911 and stayed with him until the police arrived, but it was clear he was already gone. Monica slept in that morning, and around 3 hours later, when she realized Cash was gone, she reported him missing to the police. After reviewing the baby monitor footage, Monica said she knew who the suspect was and that Darren lived in the neighborhood and would play with her kids. What's terrifying is that the footage shows Darren coming back 2 hours after kidnapping Cash and hovering over Carter, who was still asleep in his bed, but he abruptly left. At this point, Cash was already dead. Darren was arrested 1 day later and charged with burglary, kidnapping, and capital murder after Cash's blood was found on his clothing. It's not clear how Darren got into the home or what his motive was, although nothing could justify what was done to little Cash. Darren was reportedly at the home 2 days before the murder. At the time, he already had a misdemeanor and was out of jail on bond. Because of how publicized this case was, Monica's neighbor decided to go through his security footage and found that 2 months before Cash's murder, Darren was creeping around his house. He shares a back alley with Monica, and the video shows Darren opening up the gate to his yard, looking around, and then leaving. That neighbor has kids, so I can't imagine how terrifying that was to see. In 2022, Darren was found incompetent to stand trial after he was mentally evaluated by a psychologist and a psychiatrist. A third medical expert also deemed him unfit to stand trial. His attorney stated that he was in a trance-like state at the time of the murder and suffers from hallucinations due to being schizophrenic. So instead of jail time, he was transferred to Vernon Psychiatric Hospital. Since the murder, Cash's dad Trevor has released a statement on YouTube basically explaining why he left the boys with Monica. He said he knew Monica for years and went to go look for work out of town and just didn't want to bother the boys. But like I said earlier, he never once contacted Monica after he left. He never mentioned the boys' mom and didn't clarify why he never left the boys with family instead, as their mom's family had been looking for them for several months. Cash was let down by so many people. This is a story that will never leave my mind, especially as a parent.
So this is incredibly disturbing. A teacher at a Christian school in Florida was just arrested for using a yearbook to make images of his underage students online. You can't make this stuff up. This is what's happening every day here in America. So this is 67-year-old Stephen Hauser. He taught 3rd grade science at the Beacon Christian Academy in Newport Richey, Florida. Now, everybody seemed to love Stephen. That is, until an anonymous tip was made recently that led to his arrest. So, according to Stephen himself, yes, he admitted this, he used a yearbook containing photos of his students to generate these child porn images. I don't know exactly how many videos or photos Stephen had in his possession, but he admitted to using 3 of his underage students' photos to create this disgusting material. And according to a news report, authorities found 2 CP photos and 3 CP videos in Stephen's possession. I don't know if that stuff was AI generated or not, but either way, this is just a disturbing, sick story. And it's frightening thinking about how predators like this guy are going to be able to use AI and technology like that to fulfill these sick and twisted fantasies that they have. Like, what regulations do we have to prohibit this stuff from happening? After all, a tip from somebody was what got Stephen arrested. Who knows how many millions of other people are out there doing this sort of thing that haven't been caught and may not ever be caught. It's truly just some disturbing stuff, and I hate even thinking about it. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
Teacher R'd her 12-year-old student. What happened next stunned America. Mary Letourneau was born in 1962. This meant she was 34 years old when she was teaching 6th graders in 1996. Now, she was actually married with 4 children of her own when she was working at Shorewood Elementary School near to Seattle. Her marriage was strained, and it's reported that her husband was not only having an affair, but was also abusive towards her. She was spending more and more time at school, getting particularly close with one student. This was 12-year-old Villy Fowlow. He'd actually made a bet with one of his friends that he could get with the teacher. Now, obviously, a child at the time, Billy didn't really understand that this was illegal and wrong on so many levels. Billy didn't realize that soon he would actually be a victim of R. Now, the relationship did turn inappropriate, with the 34-year-old taking advantage of the child. She apparently invited him round to her house a lot in order to help him with his artwork. On one occasion, the police actually found the pair in a parked car together. Billy lied about his age, stating he was 18, and Mary lied about her identity. Now, this was really when things started to unravel. Although police initially dropped that case, they did then get a tip-off from another member of the public about the relationship between the pair. Shockingly, they then discovered she was pregnant. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of child R, and while she was awaiting sentencing, she gave birth to the pair's daughter. She was given 6 years in prison, but then took a plea. This enabled her to only get 6 months. The plea deal meant that she couldn't contact Billy or any other minors. However, she broke this and got pregnant by him for the 2nd time. Her plea agreement was therefore revoked, and she was made to spend 7.5 years in prison. The pair had another daughter together, and she spent between 1998 to 2004 in jail. Once released, she actually got married to Billy, and obviously this got huge amounts of attention from the national press. They were married for a total of 14 years until their separation in 2019. Now, the pair remained still quite close even though they divorced. Mary was then diagnosed with colon cancer aged 58. Despite them being split up, she contacted Billy and he went to be by her side until her death.
This girl was murdered in one of the most brutal ways I've ever heard, and this case is absolutely chilling. In Indonesia, a girl was found dead, naked, and covered in her own blood, and had her genitals stuffed with a garden hoe. Her name was Ino Ferreira, a 19-year-old teenager and an employee of a plastic factory. And Ino was unfortunately murdered after 3 men gang raped her at her boarding house. After Ino was absent from work for 3 days, her friends decided to go and visit her. Thinking that she was sick, Ino, who lived alone, didn't return their calls and her friends were worried. When her friends arrived at the dorm, they found that the door was locked. They then knocked and nobody answered. Feeling suspicious, they decided to inform the security to break down the door. And what they found was an absolute horrific mess. Beneath a pile of clothes and pillows, there was a bed. And there was a human leg sticking out from underneath everything. This is when they found Ino's body gruesomely murdered with a garden hoe up her genital. The police soon arrived and Ino was taken for an autopsy, and things from here would go from bad to worse. Analyzing her body, the police found semen among other bodily fluids, proving that Ino was raped. And even worse, the hoe that was stuffed deep into her genital went up 60 centimeters to her abdomen, and even puncturing one of her lungs. The police then captured 3 suspects, where one of them was the victim's boyfriend, Ramat Arifin. Ramat and Ino knew each other for about a month, and that one night Ramat decided to meet up with her in her boarding house. After being investigated, it was realized that Ramat, who was at the time Ino's boyfriend, had the motive to kill her. This is because Ino rejected him and he wanted sex. Ino refused her boyfriend's advances that day because she was afraid of being pregnant. At the time, Ramat and Ino's relationship was not recognized by Ino's parents. It's worth noting that Ramat went to Ino's boarding house because he heard that Ino's parents had a marriage plan for her with another man, and Ino was willing to go ahead with that plan. At first, all Ramat wanted was one last meeting and a goodbye kiss. Ino agreed, believing that no harm would come from fulfilling such an innocent request. This was the reason why she invited him over to her room at her women-only dormitory. But that night, the 2 of them were practically alone at the boarding school because it was quite vacant. And this was when Ramat wanted more than just a kiss. He wanted sex. Ino refused him just when Ramat began to undress her. This angered Ramat so much that he left the house and then came back with 2 other men he just met that night. The 3 men then barged into Ino's room and began to do the unthinkable. They then began torturing her and taking advantage of her, and to prevent her from screaming, they covered her face with a pillow and grabbed a fork from the kitchen. They then used the utensil to scar Ino's face, and the other person also took a garden hoe. After realizing that Ino was still able to resist and fight back, the culprit that grabbed the garden hoe hit her in the head with it. After they were all done, one of the culprits shoved the garden hoe handle first up Eno's genital, as far as it could go, and the handle then stopped when it hit the cervix. And because that was not enough, one of the culprits then kicked the blade part of the hoe as hard as he could, impaling Eno, killing her. Luckily, the police tracked down all 3 young men and they were arrested just a few days later. This case really is just a sickening read and very unsettling to know about. Some of these murders in different countries are just so brutal I can't wrap my head around them. There's also pictures of Eno's body at the crime scene, but I really don't recommend looking them up. I just think it's worth noting. What really angers me about this case is that Ramat was only sentenced to 10 years in prison for doing this, since he was a minor and the other 2 men were sentenced to death. Rest in peace to Eno, she did not deserve this at all, and this case really rubs me the wrong way.
The clip I just showed you was from the final video that Jacob Cockle ever recorded. Jacob was a famous surfer, a social media presence, a nature photographer. He did a lot, and he was a beloved figure in England. Before his death, Jacob's videos had garnered hundreds of thousands, millions of views on social media. And he was known not only for his love of the sea and his breathtaking photography, but for engaging in high-risk stunts. Stunts where he surfed over rocks or towards cliffs. Stunts where he jumped off of high buildings into the water below. And by his early 20s, Jacob had earned awards from places like National Geographic. He really was a beloved figure. But on May 28, 2013, Jacob's life would come to an extremely unfortunate end. On that day, a whirlpool appeared in Hale Harbor in England. This whirlpool would appear randomly in this harbor, and in the past, Jacob took tons of videos and photos of it and even swam in it. But on May 28, 2013, when Jacob jumped into the whirlpool wearing a horse mask, he had no idea of what was about to happen. In the footage, Jacob can be seen whirling around the whirlpool while his friend films him. They're talking about how it was stronger earlier, how it's a little scary right now, but it's nothing they can't handle. And at one point, Jacob swims out of the whirlpool, he grabs his GoPro, and he decides to get one shot of the nature event from underwater. Jacob then dives underwater and begins filming the whirlpool. This footage is all on YouTube. As he approaches the whirlpool, viewers notice that it's very strong, but it doesn't really look like something he can't handle, especially given the fact that he'd swam in similar circumstances many times. But at one point in the footage, Jacob seems to lose control and the camera work starts going all over the place. And back on the surface, Jacob's friend noticed that he went underwater, but he never came back up. Jacob's friend then frantically began to shout his name, searching for his body, but he saw no sign of Jacob anywhere. The whirlpool flowed through a tunnel into a pool, and Jacob's friend David then ran over there and started asking fishermen if they'd seen his friend. They all said no, they hadn't. Eventually, though, David saw Jacob in the pool. He was face down in the water, and he knew it was already too late. During his swim into the whirlpool, Jacob's wetsuit lost its buoyancy, which was something that Jacob didn't really account for, and that's what ended up helping him get sucked down into the whirlpool. After his death, Jacob was celebrated across the world, but I do have to say the footage of this incident is extremely chilling. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast that I co-host with my wife, Murder in America, available on all streaming platforms.
Man committed a hideous massacre because he couldn't get a girlfriend. He's been nicknamed the Incel Killer. Elliot Rodger was the son of British filmmaker Peter Rodger, who worked on the Hunger Games. His family moved to LA in 1996 for work. Elliot's parents divorced just a year later. Elliot wasn't happy when his dad remarried. He really resented being told what to do by a woman that wasn't his mum. As Elliot grew up and tried and failed to get a girlfriend, his resentment towards women just grew. He would keep journals of his thoughts and once wrote, "This was an all-boys school. How in the hell were those boys even able to meet girls to have S with? I hoped they were lying." He also talked about one of his classmates bragging about being intimate with his partner. He heard the classmate play a voice recording of the pair together and he wrote, "He grinned at me smugly. I felt so inferior to him and I hated him." Now he moved schools due to bullying, but again struggled to make connections with male friends or female love interests. Following his graduation, his parents enrolled him at Santa Barbara City College and paid for an apartment for him. Despite this, he was still angry at the world and failed to attract females. He was known to even throw drinks at women who wouldn't smile at him. In July 2013, a very disturbing incident occurred when Elliot attended a house party. Again getting no female attention, he actually climbed onto a ledge. He pretended he had a weapon and pretended to start to shoot people. He then tried to push some women over the ledge, but some men decided to push him off instead. He ended up with a broken ankle, and he lied to police and said that the attack was unprovoked. In the following months, he planned a massacre. He started uploading YouTube videos ranting about women not giving him any attention. He posted a total of 22 videos before carrying out a hideous attack. On the 23rd of May 2014, Elliot stabbed his 2 roommates and friend in a frenzied attack. He stabbed them in their apartment over 134 times. He then callously got changed, went to Starbucks and ordered a vanilla latte like nothing was wrong. The victims lay deceased and Elliot returned to his apartment. He then wrote a chilling final diary entry before going off to commit more murders. He emailed several people about why he was doing what he was about to do. He then uploaded a final YouTube vlog in which he said, "You girls have never been attracted to me. I will punish you all for it." At around 9:15 p.m. that day, he travelled to the Alpha P sorority house. Now, he knew that this sorority house housed loads of really good-looking girls who he was very resentful to. He knocked, but no one answered, so he was frustrated but left. He decided to make his way around Isla Vista, shooting people randomly. He killed 22-year-old Catherine Cooper and 19-year-old Veronica Weiss. He then went on to shoot multiple other people, causing loads of injuries. In less than 8 minutes, he had shot and injured 14 people. He then killed 20-year-old Christopher Michaels Martinez. News spread that a gunman was on the loose and armed police tracked him down. Elliot began firing at police, at which point they fired back at him. He ended up shooting himself and taking his own life in front of them. In total, he murdered 6 innocent victims and injured numerous others, not to mention the trauma that he left witnesses with. At the end of the emails that he'd sent to people, he wrote, "Finally, at long last, I can show the world my true worth."
So apparently there is a Netflix curse. I've covered so much spooky stuff on this page and I've seen nothing like this ever. So Netflix recently released a new docuseries called Breakpoint, and it showcases 10 of the hottest up-and-comers in tennis right now. But right now is also the Australian Open. And 0 of the 10 tennis players featured in the docuseries made it to even the second week of the Open. These are 10 of the best tennis players in the entire world, and 2 of them lost to players seeded at 87 and 113. And 3 of them didn't even make it to the Open because of leg injuries. And people are accusing Netflix so bad of cursing these players that Netflix even came out and said that it was just a coincidence. But if it's a coincidence that happened to every single player featured, that's pretty insane.
These are scary games to play in real life, part 3. This game is called Cat Scratch, and you need at least 2 people to play. To start the game, one of you needs to sit down on the floor and the other one lies on the floor, on their back with their head in your lap. And if anybody else is playing, just have them sit around you guys in a circle. Next, rub the person's temple who is lying down in a soothing motion as you tell them a scary story about a cat. This is how it goes. You are walking down a dark alley late at night. You are the only one there. The ground is slick with rain. The alley is filled with garbage cans and litter. But then you hear something, a movement in the garbage cans. You pick up your pace. You want to get out of the alley fast, but then you see something. Red eyes, glowing red cat eyes. They are the eyes of an enormous cat. You run, but the cat chases you and jumps on you. It scratches you 1, 2, 3. Cat scratch, cat scratch, cat scratch. After you finish the story, the person gets up quickly and pulls up the back of their shirt. And you would then notice you have red claw marks on your back. And the crazy thing is, you won't feel anything.
I deliberately crashed the plane I was flying after a breakup, killing all 149 people on board. My name is Andreas Lubitz, and I was 27 years old at the time of the incident. I had been a co-pilot for 1 year, and I was suffering from depression. I had already been treated in the past, but I had decided to stop taking my medication. It was on Tuesday, March 25th, that I decided to act. Around 9:30 p.m., the captain left the cockpit to go to the toilet. I then pressed the lock button, which locked the doors, making it impossible to enter from the outside. No one else could get in. A few seconds later, the captain came out of the bathroom and started banging on the door for me to open it. I didn't answer him, and I had already started to dive the plane. A few seconds later, the plane exploded against the mountains in the Alps in France, killing all passengers on board without exception. A few months earlier, I had told my ex-girlfriend that people would remember me, but she had no idea that I would be capable of doing something so terrible. Since this horrific event, aviation has changed its rules, and it is now forbidden to be alone in the cockpit.
I committed 2 murders at the age of 16 during my fugitive days, and that propelled me to become a globally recognized rapper. I am the rapper Tay-K, born as Taymor Trayvon McIntyre. And here's my story. Involved in dark affairs, I was placed under house arrest at the age of 16, but on March 26, 2017, I decided to cut my bracelet and escape, marking the beginning of my fugitive journey. Passionate about rap since childhood, I took advantage of my time on the run to record tracks and later create a music video. But lacking a camera, on April 23, 2017, I robbed and killed Mark Saldivar, a young photographer, to steal his camera. A few weeks later, I robbed and assaulted a 65-year-old man, taking his wallet and leaving him for dead. Then comes June 30th, 2017, where I released the track The Race and got arrested the same evening. The media seized the story, and the track went viral, eventually becoming platinum. I even received tremendous support from fans through the Free Tay-K movement when I was incarcerated. The music video for The Race now has over 240 million views on YouTube, and I currently have over 4 million monthly listeners on Spotify. But this success, I contemplate from my cell because I was sentenced to 55 years during my trial in July 2019.
We were the perfect couple on TikTok, but my husband ended up shooting me in the head. My name is Ana Abulaban. I was 28 years old in 2021 when my husband killed me with a gunshot to the head, leaving our young daughter without a mother and with a father in prison. My husband, Ali Abulaban, was already a violent man before my death. He constantly stalked me and was excessively jealous without reason. He always thought I was cheating on him, despite being a loyal woman and mother. No one knew the truth behind the image of the perfect couple that we pretended to be for everyone, both in real life and on social media. Our relationship began to deteriorate, especially in 2021, when I could no longer bear to be with him because I feared for my life and that of my daughter. On October 18th, 2021, I asked Ali to leave our home. I was afraid of his reaction, so I obtained a restraining order against him. 3 days later, he entered my home and installed an app on our daughter's iPad to listen and watch what was happening inside my house. On the same day, Ali heard the voice of one of our close friends in my house and simply couldn't bear it. He entered my home again, but this time I was present, and so was my friend. He killed my friend Rayburn Barron with 3 shots to the head. Right after that, it was my turn. He killed me the same way. Today, he faces charges for a double murder. Beware of what people show on social media.
So whatever happened to Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment at the Oxford Apartments? If you don't remember, this is where Jeffrey Dahmer was eventually caught, and this is where they found all of the gruesome discoveries associated with Jeffrey Dahmer. It's absolutely eerie to look at photos of his apartment and consider what they found in there. But what happened to the building, the Oxford Apartments building? Well, obviously after investigators discovered what they did in Jeffrey's apartment, the place was stained forever. And so shortly after all this happened, the apartments, the entire complex, they were demolished. And nowadays, all that's left is this patch of grass where the apartments once stood. It's gotta be eerie living in one of these units and knowing exactly what happened right here. I actually went and filmed a whole Jeffrey Dahmer documentary where we visited the old Oxford Apartments area and investigated for paranormal activity. Let me tell you, that place is loaded with energy. At one point, using our devices, we captured what looked like bodies laying on the ground, like 3 or 4 of them. And I think at one point, using one of our devices, we literally heard the voice of Jeffrey Dahmer coming through. I'm not kidding. I know that sounds really extreme, but you have to listen to the video and just see what I'm talking about. Anyways, it's called The Ghost of Jeffrey Dahmer if you want to look it up and learn more about the Jeffrey Dahmer story. And my wife and I actually did a whole Dahmer series on our podcast, Murder in America, if you want to listen to what I'm talking about.
A woman obsessed with true crime murdered a stranger out of curiosity. Jung Joo-jung is a 23-year-old woman from South Korea. In June 2023, she was arrested after something horrific came to light. Jung had posed as a mother on a tutoring app to lure a victim to her. She pretended to be a mother who was looking for an English tutor for her daughter. She contacted a total of 54 people before eventually picking a victim. The woman in question has not been publicly identified but is known to have been 26. She arrived at her home disguised as a young student. It's thought that her victim believed that she was a child due to her looking quite young and also her arriving in a school uniform. After being let in, she stabbed the young woman to death before leaving for the supermarket. There she bought cleaning supplies and bin bags and headed back. After returning to the house, she dismembered the young woman. She then got into a taxi carrying the woman's body parts and put them in a wooded area. The taxi driver sensed that there was something odd going on and reported this to police, who later found the body parts. They arrested Jung and she has since been convicted of murder. Investigators also found her internet search history included how to kill and ways to get rid of a body 4 months prior to the incident. The police stated that Jung had concocted the plan to catch the victim unawares and kill her out of curiosity. She had apparently had an unhealthy obsession with true crime books and shows. She has since been sentenced to life in prison.
These are videos humans were never meant to see. Okay, so we all know how North Korea lies and makes stuff up to their citizens literally 100% of the time. And anything they say to them, the citizens will believe it and have to believe it. Well, the video I'm about to show you shows a North Korean tour guide giving a tour, explaining how North Korea beat the United States of America in a war. This is absolutely crazy, and just listen to this.
Korea, they even brought aircraft carrier Enterprise. They make us surrender by force of arms. At the time, they said, they would start another Korean War if we didn't return the ship and the previous sailors. But following the instruction of the great leader Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, we responded that we would answer their retaliation with retaliation and answer their all-out war with an all-out war. We didn't surrender, but we took tough stance. So in the long run, they had no choice but to propose dialogue. So 11 months after the capture, the U.S. government sent letter of apology. That was December 1968. And that apology was the first one that they ever sent to the other government in the history of America. So following that, all sailors were sent back to the country. 82 exactly. One was sent back dead, and the rest of them were sent back alive. But we didn't send the ship because that is a war trophy. Okay? Let's continue here.
You should just say that.
This teenager made friends with a lonely stranger and he then killed her in the most horrific way. Karen Dewa was a 16-year-old girl from Fife. She was a talented dancer who was described as a likeable and kind girl. She was a family girl who spent a lot of time with her elderly nan. It was 2005 and 18-year-old Colin Evans from Wales had just moved over across the road. As I said, Karen was a really kind girl and she wanted to make him feel welcome in the area. She befriended Colin, not having a clue what he was capable of. Now, Colin was no stranger to the police and he was accused of at least 14 disturbing offences. This had been going on since he was 10 years old. One woman even reported him to police 40 separate times over stalking and harassing her young son. On one occasion, he tried to lure a young boy out of school by forging a note. Colin ended up becoming homeless and being placed in a homeless shelter in Fife. He continued stalking and harassing young children in the area. Frustratingly, he seemed to slip through the net and police just didn't want to know. Then on the 20th of January 2005, after Karen and Colin had struck up a friendship, things turned incredibly dark. The pair had had an argument and Karen reported Colin to police, not knowing her life was about to be in danger. Colin launched a vicious attack on the 16-year-old. He beat her, strangled her, and pulled her hair out. He dragged her down the stairs and then tried to dismember her body. He then stuffed her into a bin and set it on fire. His temporary accommodation was apparently covered in blood and hair. Unaware of the horrors that had taken place that evening, Karen's parents reported her missing. Tragically, the following morning, her charred remains were found. Police apprehended and charged Colin with her murder. He smirked through his court case and was given life with a minimum of 17 years.
These are scary things you should never ask Alexa. So we all know how you can ask Alexa or Siri the strangest questions and get the strangest answers. Well, this is exactly what this girl did when asking her Alexa what the Antichrist is. And this is what Alexa said. It's extremely disturbing, and wait till the end.
The Antichrist. The noun, Antichrist, can have a few meanings. 1. A particular personage or power, variously identified or explained, who is conceived of as appearing in the world as the principal antagonist of Christ. 2. An opponent of Christ, a person or power antagonistic to Christ. 3. A disbeliever in Christ. 4. A false Christ.
Alexa, is the Antichrist real?
This might answer your question. According to Wikipedia, in Christian eschatology, the Antichrist, or Antichrist, is a person prophesied by the Bible to oppose Christ and substitute himself in Christ's place before the second coming. The term is found 5 times in the New Testament, solely in the first and second epistle of John. The Antichrist is announced as the one who denies the Father and the Son.
Alexa, who is the Antichrist?
I'd rather not answer that.
Alexa, who is the Antichrist?
I'd rather not answer that.
Alexa, tell me, who is the Antichrist?
Sorry, I'm having trouble. Please try it in a little while.
Alexa, where is the Antichrist?
Wagner Lamounière has lived in Brazil and was born in Belo Horizonte, Minas Gerais, Brazil.
Okay.
In November 2021, this woman rang her mother and told her that she'd saved her 2 children. She then dialed 911 and told the dispatcher that she wanted to report a murder. It was in fact 2 murders. Tragically, Liana had slit the throats of her 2 children and then took them into their beds. The children's father, Travis, had previously voiced concerns about Liana's mental health, and she'd actually told hospital staff during a mental health episode that she was hurting her children. She later claimed that this was a false report. The children were briefly placed into Travis's care, but after Liana showed that she was receiving weekly treatment and had spent 3 weeks in a treatment centre, they were returned back to her. Travis was only allowed every Wednesday and every other weekend visits. Following the 911 call, emergency services found the 3-year-old and 5-year-old children in their beds, tucked in. They had lacerations to their throats and defensive wounds on their hands. A steak knife was found under one of the beds. Liana pleaded guilty to the murders, saying, quote, "I had to save my children before someone else killed them. It was the only way that we all wouldn't burn. Now I'm the only one of us that will." The children's father, Travis, read out a victim impact statement and said, quote, "Every second of the day, all I can picture is Liana brutally murdering my kids. I pleaded over and over that my children were in danger." Before her sentencing this week, Liana addressed the court and said, quote, "I did not want to hurt my kids for any other reason than I did not want them to get hurt by anyone else. I felt like I had to protect them forever because I felt like we were not safe. I was supposed to die with them. They visit me in my dreams, and that's how I know they're okay." Liana was sentenced this week and she received life in prison. So following on from my last video, which is tagged below, I wanted to cover the crimes of Bobby Joe Long in a little bit more detail. Bobby was born in October 1953 in West Virginia. He married his high school sweetheart Cindy in the 70s, but he was extremely abusive towards her. They had 2 children together, but eventually divorced in 1980 after a particularly bad beating in which Bobby smashed Cindy's head into the TV screen, knocking her unconscious. She received a laceration to the top of her head and she had to drive herself to the hospital, but before she left, Bobby told her that if she told anybody what had happened, he'd kill her. Divorced and alone, Bobby started to contact women through classified ads, and this is where his murder spree began. He moved to Tampa Bay in 1983, and his first victim was 20-year-old Ann Wick, who he raped and strangled while she was hitchhiking. Over the next 8 months, Bobby abducted, raped, tortured, and murdered 7 other women over 3 counties. The bodies were usually found in a state of decomposition long after the murders, after being dumped in wooded areas. They were usually vulnerable young women walking alone. Bobby would persuade them to get into his vehicle, where he'd then torture and murder them. Bobby's next victim was 17-year-old Lisa McVeigh, who featured in my last video. She was held captive by Bobby for 26 hours before eventually being released. Bobby then went on to murder another 2 women before eventually being caught. Lisa actually helped in the investigation, and Bobby was arrested in November 1984. Bobby Joe Long received 8 life sentences and 2 death sentences for his crimes. He was eventually executed by lethal injection on the 23rd of May 2019.
with his 2 surviving victims present.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This is the head crack video, one of the most cold and disturbing videos you will ever watch explained. On October 17th, 2022, Israel Trejo traveled to Riverhead, New York to buy an axe off a person who lived in an apartment building. But this is where 22-year-old James Patterson was hanging out. Nobody knows how this footage got leaked, but the CCTV camera is in the corner of the room picking up everything. The clip is short and it's only 14 seconds long, but the video is extremely traumatic. As you play the video, you see 4 people in the open space apartment. You see a female in the kitchen and another man in the same room as James and Israel. James can be seen sitting on the sofa and it looks like he's eating while looking at his phone. You also see a little dog wandering around the room. Israel Trejo is standing up with the axe resting against his shoulder. He is intently looking at James, but nobody notices it or points out that it's strange. Israel then stares at James for about 7 seconds as he holds the axe over his shoulder. He looks over his shoulder quickly before bringing the axe down directly on James's skull, and this makes an extremely loud cracking noise similar to the sound of splitting wood. Israel and the other man in the room then run out of the apartment. The axe is still stuck in James's skull as his body stiffens up and contorts. The woman in the kitchen realizes something is wrong as she heard the loud cracking noise. She then leaves the kitchen and sees James with the axe in his skull. She lets out a few curses before letting out the loudest scream you will ever hear in your life. It's so loud it literally causes the audio to pop. The best way to describe it is a blood-curdling scream. James was then taken to the hospital with the axe still in his head, according to a police report. He had surgery but succumbed to his injuries and died 3 days after the attack. Israel was arrested shortly after this for suspicion of murder, and in August 2023 he was sentenced to life in prison. There was absolutely no motive for this attack, and it was just senseless murder. This case is absolutely sickening and awful, and may James Patterson rest in peace.
This is the most haunted theme park in America, Lake Shawnee in West Virginia. This place is haunted by thousands of ghosts. So Lake Shawnee is a massive abandoned amusement park with a very dark and very disturbing past. Long before the amusement park was ever constructed, a tragedy already occurred on the land. You see, in 1775, a settler named Mitchell Clay made his claim right there on that property. Only a few years later, though, 2 of his children were murdered by indigenous peoples. But a 3rd child of Mitchell's, named Ezekiel, was captured, he was brought to Ohio, and he was burned at the stake. I mean, look at it. It even says right there on the historical plaque. You can't make this up. All 3 of those kids' bodies are buried over here in the park property. Now, when Lake Shawnee was first established, people just kept dying. There were so many accidents in the park that it began to gather a haunted or cursed reputation. For example, a child was killed right here on this old abandoned swing set while the swing was in operation. Obviously, there was a drowning or 2 in this lake, and over here in this lake, I heard a story from the owner when I visited that a child was pulled under the water, supposedly by some sort of phantom force. After the child went under the water, the parents searched, they couldn't find their child, but eventually, a while later, they felt something brush against their leg under the water, and it was their child's body. But why could this place be so cursed, you ask? Well, right next to the property is a mass grave for indigenous peoples where over 3,000 bodies are suspected to be buried. I'm talking about the parks right here, and just over here is where this huge burial plot is. And people think that obviously if they were all buried right there, some of those bodies may have moved in this direction. Over the years, people have experienced all sorts of paranormal activity here, the most terrifying kind of all. People have seen children sliding down the slides, riding the rides. People have seen figures riding the old Ferris wheel, waving at them, shadow figures that disappear. People have heard the sounds of giggling, heard children's voices, adult voices, and people have even seen eerie creatures and other shadow forms in these woods that surround the park. There's even more history that I'm missing out on here, but if you want to watch the full documentary that I shot there where we stayed overnight, just head to my YouTube channel. It was one of the craziest nights of my life. We had the entire amusement park to ourselves, and we caught some crazy paranormal activity on camera while we were there. Let me know below, would you spend the night here alone?
This killer accidentally admitted to his crimes by accident when he forgot he was wearing a microphone while taking part in a documentary. This is how a true crime documentary exposed a killer. In 1971, Robert Durst met Kathleen McCormack and they got married. At the time of her disappearance in 1982, Kathleen had nearly graduated college. She was last seen by a witness at a dinner party where she appeared to be upset. She got a call from Robert and left. Robert admitted to having argued with Kathleen that night, but he said he put her on a train to New York and then never saw her again. Her friend called police to report her missing. Interestingly, Kathleen had been treated at a medical centre for facial bruises weeks prior to this and told the friend that Robert had done it. Robert had actually been dating someone else for some time prior to this and had been living separately to Kathleen. When her family broke into her cottage to try and find out where she was, they found the place had been trashed and her possessions put in the bin. Kathleen's family always believed that Robert was involved in her disappearance. In 2000, Susan Berman, a friend of Robert's, was found murdered. Now, she'd actually provided Robert with an alibi for Kathleen's disappearance. Now, pay really close attention to this next bit. Days after she was killed, a letter addressed to the Beverly Hills Police Department contained Susan's address and the word cadaver on it. On the envelope, Beverly was misspelled. Robert admitted in 2005 that Susan had called him shortly before her death to say that the police wanted to question her about Kathleen going missing. It's believed that Robert killed Susan to keep her quiet. In 2001, Robert's neighbour's body parts were found floating in Galveston Bay. Robert's elderly neighbour, Morris Black, had been killed and Robert was arrested. He was actually released on bail and fled and was found about a month later in Pennsylvania. He was found with $37,000 cash, 2 weapons, and interestingly, Morris Black's driving license. In court, Robert claimed he was acting in self-defense. He said he'd accidentally shot Morris and dismembered his body. Due to lack of forensics, he only got 5 years in jail. This is where things get really crazy. HBO was filming a documentary called The Jinx. During production, Susan's stepson found a letter written by Robert. This contained the same spelling error in the word Beverly as the anonymous letter to police. This implicated Robert in the murder. Now, while filming the documentary, Robert needed the toilet. He forgot that he had a microphone still attached to him. He was recorded talking to himself. He said, "There it is, you're caught. You're right, of course, but you can't imagine. Arrest him." And then he said, "What a disaster. He was right. I was wrong." And finally he said, "I'm having difficulty with the question. What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course." Imagine getting married only to be decapitated by your husband 3 months later. 21-year-old couple Jared and Angie got married in October 2022. Around 4 p.m. on the 11th of January, police were called to their home in Texas. Police made a grim discovery in the pair's bathroom after finding, quote, what appeared to be the head of the victim to be in the shower, end quote. Angie's body was discovered on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood with multiple stab wounds to her back. It was actually Jared's poor parents that initially made this discovery after entering the home. They then obviously alerted police to what they found. Jared was arrested and has confessed to killing his wife with a kitchen knife. Jared was actually captured on CCTV, casually stealing a bottle of beer from Angie's workplace just minutes after it's believed that he killed her. Angie's friends have reported to police that the couple's relationship was toxic and Jared was very controlling. Jared's bond is currently set at $500,000. This schoolboy stabbed his teacher to death in front of a classroom full of students. 61-year-old Anne McGuire was a Spanish teacher teaching in Leeds. She'd actually worked at the school for 40 years and she was only 5 months off retirement. However, in April 2014, something absolutely horrific happened. One of her students was 15-year-old Will Cornick. He'd always been described as a smart student who never really caused any trouble. Classmates regarded him as a polite student, but after he got diagnosed with diabetes, his personality seemed to change. In 2013, he tried to join the army, but because of his diagnosis, he was rejected. Being in the army had been his dream, so this was really upsetting for him. After failing to complete his Spanish homework, he was given detention by Anne. He also expressed a wish to her that he wanted to drop Spanish, but she wouldn't let him, which only angered him more. He began to develop a deep-rooted grudge against Anne. Shockingly, he reportedly messaged his friends on Facebook asking if one of them would kill her for him for £10. During one school day, halfway through his Spanish class, Will decided to get up and attack Anne with a knife. The classmates watched on in horror as he chased her out of the classroom. When there, another teacher heard her screams and tried to shield Anne from any more blows from him. Will then allegedly returned to his class and told his classmates how it was a shame that he hadn't killed her. However, Anne did actually pass away from her injuries. Will later admitted that he did plan also to kill 2 other teachers. One of them was actually pregnant at the time. He's been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. This is one of the most horrific cases I've heard recently, so please be warned before watching. 29-year-old Taylor Parker has just been sentenced to death for a crime so horrendous that I can't believe a human is capable of this. Regan Simmons Hancock and Taylor